Year 8 Adaption and Inheritance Knowledge Test. Okay. Right, what do animals compete for? They compete for food, water, shelter, and mates. Okay, they're the kind of things that most animals kind of very generally actually compete with each other for. What do plants compete for? The amount of light, water, nutrients out of the soil, and space. Okay, so most plants, that's very generic again, are competing for those different things. Okay, so evolution, right? Evolution is the process where living things gradually change over time. That's change. Right, so for example, giraffes get longer necks, right? Because the giraffe with the longest neck at the time, what happens is they survive because they can eat the food better. What is extinction? That is then where no members of a species exist. Okay, so the best example of that is then the dodo. Right, the dodo, the bird, right, what happened is they were hunted and killed until not a single one existed anymore. Describe the adaptations of a camel. It's got a big hump, okay, which stores fat. It has big feet, so that then what it can do, it can walk on sand better. Its colour for camouflage, and it also has big eyelashes to stop the sand going in its eyes. Describe the adaptations of a polar bear. Excuse me. Big paws, so it doesn't sink into the snow. It's white for camouflage. It has large layers of fat, because obviously the heat, right, and it's going to got very, very thick fur, right, and what it is, it's adapted. So just look at the animal and think about how it's different to other things so it can stay in those areas. What is an extremophile, right, and give an example. So an extremophile is an animal or a bacteria or any living thing that lives in an extreme environment. Right, so it could be deep sea fish. Right, so where they are is they're then living right down in the sea, and then the water pressure is constantly on them. And if you bring them up, right, they're not used to the water pressure, so what happens is then they swell and they can just explode. And you might get bacteria that live in very salty conditions or very hot conditions. Okay, so that's like an extremophile. So extreme means obviously something way beyond different, way beyond normal, and phile means like. List the reasons why a species may go extinct. Now there's lots and lots of different ones on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through them, right? So you could have better adapted competition. All right, and we've then got disease, we've got human predation, we've got climate change, we've got loss of habitat, we've got invasive species. Okay, now with these, an example, right, better adapted competition, right, the grey squirrel comes into mind every single time, right, because the grey squirrel is twice as big as a red squirrel, and it's more aggressive, and what it does, it dominates, and it's better adapted. A disease, there's a disease called myxomatosis. Now I think I've actually spelt that completely and utterly wrong. Alright, so maybe part of this is, you could go and have a look it up, myxomatosis, right? And what that is, that's a disease of rabbits. Human predation, right? It could be we used to go and find the dodo and we used to go and eat the dodo. Climate change, right? It could end up be that polar bears go extinct, right? Because their habitat is disappearing because of climate change. Loss of habitat is the rainforests. So a lot of animals within the rainforest itself are losing their habitat, so they could become extinct. And an invasive species, again, could be the grey squirrel. Right, because what they are doing is they're evading, right, and what they're then doing is they're then taking over the areas for the red squirrel. Right. The only one I just don't like there is the myxomatosis. I can never remember how to spell it. Right, but it might be a good thing just to get on Google and have a look, right, and have a look about what happened with myxomatosis. Question number 9, right, describe Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. Right, so natural selection is where the individual most suited to an environment is more likely to breed. Okay, and then what happens is the best characteristic is then passed on. Okay, so what they are is they're then passed on, right? So if you think the biggest lion, right, the biggest lion is most suited to its environment. So what the biggest lion does, it wins the fights with the other lions and it breeds, and then the genes being the biggest lion are then passed on. Question number 10, explain how the giraffe evolved a long neck by natural selection. I kind of mentioned this one before. Right, a giraffe with the longest neck can feed the highest. Right, so if they can feed the highest trees, then what they can do is they can get more food, right, and then what they do is they then survive better, and then they can then pass on the characteristics. So speciation is where you'll have one species, and what it'll do is it'll split into two separate species. And what a species means, it means they wouldn't be able to interbreed between each other. Best example of that is the Galapagos finches, right, where there's lots of islands in the Galapagos Islands, and what they did is because the islands were spread out over such a long period of time, then the finches then became very different. Some changed to look like they can eat nuts, and some changed, it's kind of a lot to do with the beak shape. Question number 12, right? Describe how the populations of peppered moths changed from pre-industrial to post-industrial. So pre means before, post means afterward. So pre, they were white because all the trees were much lighter. Post, they became darker, even verging on black, because all the trees were then covered in pollution. 13, describe two types of variation. The two main types of variation are inherited and environmental. Right? So variation is where two things are different. So if you think about your mum and your dad, right, you've kind of got sort of characteristics of both of them, and what you've done is you've inherited from mum and you've inherited from dad, which then gives variation. You don't look exactly the same. If you had identical twins, right, then obviously genetically they're identical, right, but if you then took one to Brazil and one to the Antarctic, they would then, an environment would then have an impact on their hair colour, skin colour, how tall they are, based on the environments that they're actually living in. 14, name the 4 purely inherited characteristics, right? So what they're doing here is they're saying that a lot of characteristics inherited, right, but these are 4 that are without any shadow of a doubt straight from your mum and your dad. Eye colour, hair colour, blood group and certain inherited diseases. Inherited diseases. All right, and what these inherited characteristics are, they cannot be affected by the environment. Right, once you've got a certain blood group, it ain't changing. Once you've got your certain hair colour, it ain't changing. All right, once you've got your certain eye colour, it's not changing based on anything. And then also inherited diseases. But in order of organisation, right, nucleus, DNA, right, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to change it, and I'm then going to put smallest to largest, right, because what you've got to do is you've got to make sure that whatever the question says. So the smallest is a gene, it then goes to DNA, it then goes to chromosome, and then it goes to a nucleus, and then it goes to a cell. Right, so if you think about it, you've got your cell, right, that's the biggest, you've got your nucleus inside there, you've then got your chromosomes, which are kind of your X-shaped things inside there, right, so cell, nucleus, chromosomes inside there, chromosomes are then made of the DNA, and then parts of DNA are then the genes. Describe the structure of DNA, right, this is the easiest one of all, is a double helix, right, and what that means, it's kind of a bit like a spring, right, and then with another spring running next to it. Question number 17, right, what we've got is we've got our keywords. Characteristic that helps an organism to survive is adaption, right, we talked about camels and polar bears, all sorts of animals have got adaptations. Characteristic that makes any value within a range of values is a continuous variation. A characteristic that can only be a certain value is discontinuous. So continuous variation is something like height, right, where you can start off small and you can go all the way up to 8 feet or however the biggest person is. Only a certain value discontinuous is whether you've got size 7 feet or size 8 feet. The remains of a plant and animals that turn to stone is a fossil. The way in which living organisms depend on each other to survive, grow and reproduce is independence, and difference in characteristics with a species is variation. Now this is then a biology topic, right, and the most important thing in a biology topic are the words. You have to use the correct wording whenever you're talking about it, right, so it says what's it called when a species turns into other species, two other species, then what you do is you say speciation, right? If you're then talking about anything to do with variation, you've got to make sure you say inherited and you don't say from mum and dad. So what you've got to do is you've got to be very specific in your wordings. And again, watch this video, write it all down, right, into your own words, and then what you then do is you then test yourself using the other video. Also read around, because read around helps with your knowledge.